the defense have prepared well for this presentation, and I think they have provided some arguments that prosecution would have to respond to later on. I think there were two arguments raised, but so far, 3 points were quite ethically argued by Kaufman. First is that when you look at the speeches made by the former president, his argument is that the evidence presented by the prosecution is selective. It's based on media reports, which are selective and did not encapsulate the whole meaning of President Duterte. In fact, there are some exaltation and order or instruction to the police to only use force in the lawful exercise of the office, no, as a self-defense. From a legal standpoint, however, we will recall the presentation of the prosecution. They really presented a lot of the speeches. And during the defense presentation, they identified some of the speeches and qualified some of the speeches. And I think the judges might want to require to check whether the evidence is insufficient for the defense to explain all the speeches made. Because in the first 2 days, we saw a substantial presentation, different speeches where the president himself even owns up to the killings that happened and say that he's the one responsible. So on one hand, I think it's a valid legal argument to make. I do feel perhaps in the next part of the defense presentation and maybe tomorrow also, they would have to comprehensively respond to all of the evidence presented by the prosecution. So that's one aspect that I think was emphatic. The second one, I think, is the argument against the issuances, especially on the Oplan, Tokhang, and high-value target, double barrel. And they were saying that nowhere in the memorandum circular did the President Duterte order the killing. Only used the word neutralize, only instructed the police to exercise their functions in line with human rights obligations. So I think that was a very substantial presentation, and that was clarified by the defense. So I think the prosecution has to rebuild their argument, respond to this analysis of the defense. From a legal standpoint, again, I think we will recall that the prosecution presented eyewitness accounts where the police supposedly used force, even if the victims are not have any weapons or are merely with their families. I can recall the narrative presentation by the counsel for the victims. They did say that the police really understood neutralize as killing. So I think the defense has to respond to that more also, because so far they've just looked at the text of the policy, but the evidence presented by the prosecution on how the police understood it and how Duterte celebrated those deaths and killings, that has to be responded, whether later tonight or tomorrow. And finally, I think a very, very important point as well was their challenge on the absence of a common plan. They were saying that Duterte, the prosecution did not prove any or provide any evidence that Duterte was part of a common plan, meeting of the minds, no direct evidence to establish his pivotal role. At this point, I think the evidence they have presented, a lot of evidence.
All right, we now lost Attorney Yarcia there. I hope we can get him back while he's... Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. We got caught there. When you were talking about the connection, the common plan, the lack of evidence that would connect the former president to the killings.
Yes. Well, the defense said that there's no direct evidence or sufficient evidence to link President Duterte to the killings. And they were asking for the prosecution to provide some direct evidence or even looking at the circumstantial evidence presented and whether they're enough. We will recall and we have to compare this with the evidence of the prosecution because they did mention promises of impunity, financial support, promotions, a lot of supposed attributable acts for Duterte. And I think one aspect was addressed by the defense, but the judges may require a full response to each of the attribution arguments made by the prosecution. Those are the arguments so far and our commentary and our reflections on the presentation of the defense.